Number one, the firewall must come down. It must come down. The people of China, the citizens of China, the decent, hardworking, old 100 names in China have to be able to communicate to the world. They have to get out there and tell them what their situation is. The world has to see this unfiltered by the Chinese Communist Party. And right now, there is no justification, no moral justification to have the firewall up. This is an emergency and it's a humanitarian crisis. The firewall must come down, and any American company that's providing technology or capital or personnel to keep that firewall up is going to burn in hell, okay? Because now they are just prolonging the suffering of the Chinese people. That's number one. Number two, and I said this a couple weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party must take the best doctors from the world, from the CDC, the World Health Organization, from the Imperial College in London, from Hong Kong University, Dr. Gabriel Leung, the top virus hunters, the best, have to be allowed to get into Wuhan and Hubei province and see and report back exactly what the problem is and what their recommendations are. And number three, the Chinese Communist Party has to be able to accept doctors and nurses from all over the world that would volunteer, military or otherwise, to go to Wuhan and go to Hubei. Because right now we see, I think there's 5,000 doctors and nurses that are infected, okay? The new crisis you have is a collapse of the public health system in the central province and in Wuhan city. If that collapses, you can have tens of millions of people die. And that is something the CCP can avoid by taking nurses and doctors from all over the world and let them go to those central things. Until the government does that, to me, it's showing that two things. Number one, they don't care about the Chinese people. They don't care how many people die. And number two, they don't care about people throughout the world. What they care about is what they've always cared about, and that is their hold on power and their hold on wealth.
China says the coronavirus epidemic is coming down. But is it really so? Steve K. Bannon, host of War Room Pandemic, sat down with me to discuss the most critical aspects of this pandemic. What's the truth in China? Why did the Chinese government still refuse to let American experts in? Could the virus be made in a lab? Why does the Chinese leadership rush biosafety legislation? Could America see generic drug shortages if the epidemic prolongs? I'm Simone Gao, and you are watching Zooming In. Thank you, Mr. Bannon, for being with us again.
Thanks for having me on, Simone.
Okay, so we've been hearing conflicting messages from the Chinese government these days. Well, on one hand, the Politburo sent out a statement that the Wuhan situation is not under control. But if we look at the CDC number from China, just during the last week, the numbers, newly added confirmed cases has been dropping. Every day from a week ago, it was 15,000 newly added cases. Yesterday it was 395. So what is going on?
First of all, every number you're seeing that comes out of the CCP and comes out of China is a total and complete lie. They're all lies. You know, they've tried to go back and have different methodologies about how they're counting this. So people should just discount that. And I know people that watch your show are sophisticated enough to understand the CCP just lies. It's the crime is that the mainstream media in the West repeats these lies over and over and over again. As we sit here today doing this interview, 1/10 of the world's humanity, 10% of the world's humanity is under some form of quarantine in central China. We have anywhere from 60 to 80 million, maybe 100 million people in Hubei and around surrounding areas under a strict quarantine. We have another 400 or 500 or 600 million people throughout the rest of China on some form of lockdown, which is a quasi quarantine. And the reason that is, there's only two ways right now to solve this virus. A vaccine, which a vaccine is anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, 2 years away. Or what they call social separation, which is quarantine. And what we know is that there are not 700 million people under some form of quarantine with only 70,000 infected. The numbers are huge. Ms. Guo says there's millions. Other people, scientists are saying there are hundreds of thousands. The deaths go from anywhere from Ms. Guo says it's over 200,000 to other people are saying it's in the tens of thousands. But one thing I can guarantee you and promise you, that the numbers that the CCP are putting out are total and complete lies. And here's why we know this. Right now, today, when we're doing this interview, just before we started, the Politburo came out and said, quote, "We do not have the situation in Hubei province or in Wuhan under control, and that it is, quote unquote, more complex and more severe than we anticipated." And so they are essentially, which is a huge loss of face, right? And particularly, this is the committee that President Xi, he's the convening authority. He's the top person. He and Wang Xishan. And so for them to put that out for the world's media to see, admitting that they are not on top of this situation in Wuhan, this biblical plague that has infected the poor people of China, is in the mainstream media. It should be outraged that they've taken these lies for so long and just kind of repeated them. And now you're starting to see, I think the lies are coming apart because you can no longer control the information that's coming out of Wuhan. The tragedy of Wuhan, led by one of the stories, and your audience should understand, that affected people most in the United States, was the chief medical officer for the Wuchang Hospital in Wuhan when he died, right, in the line of service to help his fellow countrymen in China. When the ambulance moved away to take his body to be cremated, his poor wife, who's one of the nurses, was banging on the ambulance and crying out for her dead husband. That really hit many Americans in the heart. And so I think you're seeing today that the Chinese Communist Party, who lies about everything, now their lies are being exposed to a global audience.
Mm-hmm. Just last week, I attended a CDC briefing at the National Press Club in the States, in D.C., and the spokesperson from the CDC was still praising the Chinese government for transparency and their ability to build those massive hospitals. And she cited the official number from China. So my question is, do you think the American government is aware of the possibility of the scope of this epidemic?
I think there's there's obviously different people in the government. The official policy is to try to be, and one of the reasons I think they've been doing that, and President Trump has been reinforcing that and saying good things about Xi, is they're trying to get the cooperation of the Chinese Communist Party to actually give real information, and most importantly, to allow CDC personnel, virus hunters, in from the World Health Organization, CDC, Hong Kong University, Dr. Gabriel Leung, others that could actually go to Wuhan and start to get their hands around this situation. I think they feel that if they call out the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, for their lies, that it'd be much tougher to get there. There are many people in the government that know that the Chinese Communist Party is lying to people. They're lying about these numbers. They're not being transparent at all. But I believe for the greater good, remember, we can't start to solve this problem. This is Dr. Thay and Lian Chan Han had this two-part articles in The Hill called The Biological Chernobyl, brought on by the CCP. Until we actually get world experts in there to assist the Chinese people and to assist these heroic doctors, you're only going to have this virus is only going to metastasize. Mm-hmm. The number one priority for everybody is to get there and help the Chinese people, to help stop this in China, and by stopping that, to stop it spreading throughout the world. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think President Trump is trying to accomplish. But as everybody that watches your show knows, or goes to NTD TV or goes to the Epoch Times, they understand that the Chinese Communist Party is a collection of gangsters. They think like gangsters, they operate like gangsters, and they don't care. And I've said this many times, they do not care if 25 or 30 million Chinese die in Hubei province or in central China. They could care less. All they care about is holding on to power. And so all you're going to see is a continuation of their lies and their misrepresentations.
Mm-hmm. As you said, 760 million Chinese people are under quarantine, and half China is locked down. But things are not improving. The spread of the virus is not being stopped. What does that tell us?
It tells you that it's out of control. We have a pandemic. Dr. Stephen Hatfield wrote this book, and I recommend everybody in your audience get this. It's called 3 Seconds to Midnight. Dr. Hatfield is one of the world's leading experts, here in the United States, one of the top experts on pandemics. In this book, he goes through all the historical pandemics. He wrote this book before this pandemic came out, but it's really scary. And what Dr. Hatfield says, there's only two ways to solve this right now: a vaccine or social separation in a quarantine. He was just on our show, War Room Pandemic, the other day, and what he said was, this is proven because it continues to have to quarantine additional people, that the quarantine, the social separation in central China is not working. And here's why it's not working. Number one, they suppressed the information for too long. They lied to people for too long. So the possibility they had to contain this back in December, the Chinese Communist Party misled everybody and lied about everything. It then has now metastasized and it's gotten out of control. And the measures they've tried to put in are just not that thorough. You know, you've seen what they've tried to do, and they're just not that on top of things. And so this continues to spread. Dr. Hatfield and many of the experts here think that it's gotten now out of control in China. And one of the things he says, and other people like Ms.L and myself say, you can tell how out of control it is because no one on that central committee today in Beijing, not one person, and not Wang Xishan and not Xi, have been to Wuhan, right? And the question has to be from the Chinese people, why have their leaders not come to Wuhan to assess the situation in person? There's two reasons. Reason number one, they don't want to be associated with the failures of the quarantine, right? They're firing local party cadres, but they don't want to be associated. Number two, they don't want to die, okay? When you have the senior medical personnel, the doctor that's in charge of the number one hospital and the doctor that's really in charge of kind of the overall medicine for the entire and public health safety for the entire region, when he dies by contracting the virus and he's dead, that's why CCP will not go down there. So all of their other talk is happy talk. Until Xi goes to Wuhan and stands at a quarantine center and looks the Chinese people in the eye and says, I'm on top of this and I'm going to be here until this thing is solved, it's all lies. And so every stat they put out, every number they put out, every way they want to spin it is a total and complete lie. This is Beijing where all the party cadres are. This is Shanghai where many of the party cadres and the most sophisticated businessmen, when they sit there and they don't believe anything the CCP says, that tells you everything you need to know about the CCP. They know they're lying. They know you can't depend upon their information. So if you want to save yourself, you essentially have to self-quarantine. So you have among the wealthiest and most powerful people. This is how deadly this virus is. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how wealthy you are, you're not protected by this. And that's why the wealthiest and most powerful people in the most powerful centers in China are now self-quarantining.
There are some other unusual movements by the Chinese government. Recently, the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology released guidelines on safety and management of the viral labs. And Xi Jinping also made comments about accelerating biosafety legislation. So what's your read on this? I mean, why do they make such a sensitive announcement at such sensitive time?
I pray to God every night that this virus actually came from a bat or from a bird, and that it came to a human transmission and then human to human, that it actually is something of the physical world. Because those people and those voices that are out there, they're saying there's something about that P4 lab. It's not a random thing that the one lab in China, a pathogen 4 lab at the highest levels, built by France after SARS to help the Chinese people find vaccines for more SARS-like virus. It's not by chance that that's in Wuhan. The only one in all China is relatively close to where the market was. We got to pray that it's not something that either came out of trying to work on a vaccine and leaked out of the lab, or it was part of a biological weapons program. The disturbing thing about the CCP is the moves they're making now, talk about biological lab safety and things like that, concern me. Also, some of the rumors they're trying to start that the CIA was in back of this start to concern me. The people in China and the expatriate Chinese should understand that the Chinese Communist Party has a terrible record when it comes to biological weapons, okay? And they're hiding and lying of their biological weapons program. So you have many voices in the West now, Senator Tom Cotton, Bill Gertz, Miles Guo, and others that are sitting there going, it's all lies and it came out of their weapons program. I think we ought to pray that it was natural, because that means it's going to be easier to find a vaccine. There are many things about this virus that are quite concerning. Okay, number one is the asymptomatic period. You know, many people have caught it, have said hey, the person I actually caught it from didn't have any symptoms.
That's right.
Dr. Li, the great hero of Wuhan, he was the whistleblower. He was the one that the Chinese Communist Party, in their devil nature, tried to make him sign a thing saying he was a rumor monger. They tried to ruin his career. They were going to throw him in prison. It turns out he was right. He was a truth teller. He was a whistleblower. If they had listened to Dr. Li and his cohorts of 8 doctors back in December, they might have gotten a grip on this thing. But what they cared about is their power, and they said, no, you're a rumor monger. You had to sign these documents that said Dr. Li basically had to say he was lying. Dr. Li then went back to, when he was basically exonerated by the Supreme Court of China, he went back to the hospital to volunteer to work again, okay, to help this. And he says later, when he was dying in his last interview with the New York Times, he said, I made a mistake. I got careless. He took off his hazmat suit and didn't have all the thing when he worked on an 82-year-old patient that had no symptoms. And he caught the disease from her, and he was dead 10 days later. And I understand that the doctor, the head medical professional in Wuchang Hospital, I've been told, I haven't verified it, that he also caught this from someone that was asymptomatic. So right now we don't know, and one of the reasons we don't know is that the CCP is not allowing the world's top virus hunters in there to check this out. Everybody's depending on information they give, and you can't depend on anything the CCP gives you because they lie as easily as they draw breath.
Mm-hmm. You know, the BBC did an interview with a doctor who was treating the first patient of this coronavirus outbreak, and this man, he's like an older man.
Yes,
and
patient zero.
Patient zero. We don't know if it's patient zero, but just call him patient zero. He is bedridden. He doesn't have any mobility. He doesn't have any. I mean, obviously, he didn't go to the seafood market. But the interesting thing is, the doctor will not reveal like who he has contacted with, because this man cannot get this virus by himself, right? We know he's not related to the market, but who he has contacted with, the doctor wouldn't reveal. So I think that's kind of telling, right?
It's telling, and it's unacceptable. The world's now 31 nations in the world have this. The world's economy is about to basically lock down because of the Chinese, the interlocked nature of the global supply system, the global supply chain coming out of China, one belt, one road, things you and I have talked about many times. This is what Senator Tom Cotton has to say. Senator Tom Cotton says, it's not incumbent upon the world to come in and find this information and keep asking questions. It's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing and the rulers, okay, to come forward and have the world come in right now to both assist the Chinese people and to help protect the safety of the world. This shows you something we have said for years and years and years and years. The Chinese Communist Party is a danger to the Chinese people, and more importantly, they're a danger to all mankind. They think like gangsters. They're a bunch of thugs, and now they've got this situation. They either created, or if they didn't create it and it was natural, they suppressed the information about it and lied about it to keep their own power. Either way, they have helped destroy China. And now in doing this, they're starting to destroy the entire world. That's why they have to be held accountable.
You know, the WHO expert went to China yesterday without the American experts. So, I mean, the American government has been pressing the Chinese government several times. Why do you think, what are they afraid of? What are they trying to hide?
They're afraid of two things. Number one, they're afraid to show the outside world we need the foreign devils. We need America. America's the enemy. America is the enemy of the Chinese people. America is the enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. America is the enemy of China. So they don't want to, if they have to have the foreign devils come in, they're afraid they lose the mandate of heaven. They've lost their legitimacy because they had to, in a panic, depend upon the Americans to come in and save them. Number two, and more importantly, they understand that when the rest of the world and the top doctors, including Dr. Gabriel Leung from Hong Kong, when they get there, they're going to understand that, number one, either this came out of a biological weapons plan, or if it didn't, you guys lied about it, and you didn't focus on Dr. Li and these other doctors, you might have been able to stop this in December. And that's when you're going to find patient zero. Was he really the first patient, or was it in November, or was it in October? Okay, that's what they're petrified about. They've always been petrified of one thing: the truth. They can't tell the truth. This is how they've suppressed and destroyed the Tibetan Buddhists. This is what they've done in East Turkestan with the Uyghurs. This is what they've done with the Falun Gong. This is what they've done with the underground Christians. This is what they've done with the underground Catholic Church. This is what they've done to the Chinese people. All they have done is lie and suppress for decades and decades and decades, and they got away with it. And they got away with it for one reason, that the Western capitalists and companies made so much money on the suppression of the Chinese people that everybody just looked the other way and said, yeah, okay, the Chinese people, you know, heck with them. Okay? Now that it's become the world's problem, right? Now that the supply chain has made it a world problem, now that people are sick in Iran, in the most sacred city of Qom, now that people in Lombardy, in the most wealthy part of Italy now have an outbreak, okay? Now that there's an outbreak in Canada, now that there's an outbreak in the United States, now that 31 nations have this, right? And it looks like it could spread throughout other nations. Now it's the world's problem. Now everybody's saying, hey, I thought the Chinese guys, they told me it was only 70,000 and a couple thousand dead. What do you mean it may be hundreds of thousands or millions, you know? What do you mean they don't have it under control? Now that all their lies are being exposed every day, and you know why? She is right. The virus is a demon. And the demon cannot allow to hide. This demon virus is exposing the Chinese Communist Party for all their lies and misrepresentations and their suppression and brutal put down of the Chinese people, of every ethnicity, of every religious belief, of every organization out there. They're now being held accountable for that.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I think the suspicion of the origin of this virus is not going to go away for a while. And, the head of the Wuhan Viral Lab, Dr. Shi Zhengli, she and a bunch of American researchers published an article in 2015 in UK's Natural Medicine that they synthesized a new virus that combines the coronaviruses from bats with the existing SARS virus, making this new virus more pathogenic than the existing SARS virus and able to transmit to humans. And the American government terminated this research because they think this new virus is a public health threat. We're not aware of whether Dr. Shi has ever terminated her side of the research. But at least, such man-made high pathogenic virus has existed in that lab, in the Wuhan lab. So if the rumor is true, if the truth is really the lab-constructed virus got out, how do you think the world will react to it?
If that is true, the Chinese Communist Party is over. That's why look, we don't know if it's true or not true. Here's what we do know. There's enough information coming out, enough uncertainty. We can't have uncertainty. China has been around for 10,000 years. You may lose China because of this virus. This spread of this virus may destroy and kill enough people or destroy the economy that China as we know it may not survive, right? It looks like right now, and they're the ones that admit that we don't have control of it, and we're 8 weeks into this. And the experts say, hey, if the quarantine doesn't work, it just spreads. Right? And the mathematics is it doubles every 6.2 days. Well, Dr. Gabriel Leung, just his mathematics says it's going to run through at least May. That's over 1 billion people. So the question gets to be, we have to have all information out there and we have to have it all down. So it doesn't have just to be rumor. It doesn't have to be people saying, hey, I saw a report here or here or here. Senator Tom Cotton sums it up. It's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party to have the world's experts get into Wuhan, talk to the experts. They have a new major general in the PLA. I think her name's Wen Che, right? Wen Che, who's the senior, Shen Wei, who's the senior biological weapons expert for China, is now in charge of the situation there. She has to invite in the world so we get all the information and find out what is actually going on there. We need to get our understanding of this virus, and we needed to do it today. Mm-hmm. And why do we need to do it? We need to do it to help save the Chinese people of all this immense suffering they're going through, right? The psychological damage, the scars. China is such a society built upon the family. And part of the part when your ancestors pass away, your grieving process and the burial rites and everything it goes is endemic to thousands of years of Chinese society. And now when they go door to door, when Vice Premier Sun, her mandate, she goes door to door and they knock on your door and take your temperature. If they deem you have the virus, you go to a quarantine center, not to a hospital. And what you do is your family never sees you again. You leave through the back to an ambulance when you're dead, and they take you to cremate you, and your ashes are just then thrown somewhere, right? The psychological scars on the Chinese people are going to be very deep because of this. So this means it's incumbent upon the CCP, and I will tell the CCP, and they know that I'm one of their sworn enemies, but they have to understand something. If they continue to suppress information, the world is going to unite, every nation in the world, and say, these guys are dangerous. They're a danger to the Chinese people, right? They're a danger to the state, to the country of China, and they're dangerous to the world, and they must be removed.
Mm-hmm. Before the coronavirus epidemic stops, I think China is already having a humanitarian crisis. I don't know how many of those footages if you have seen.
I've seen hours of them.
Yes.
It's heart-rending.
So yeah, I wonder if the world's mainstream media will get on top of this and say this.
The mainstream media is not going to get on top, but the mainstream media covers for the Chinese Communist Party. If you see the mainstream media's coverage of this, it's embarrassing. All they do is repeat the same lies, and maybe every now and again. I saw today on Christian TV where they picked up my interview with Ms.L, and they're trying to get it out there to try to get humanitarian aid to the people of China. I went on Fox 2 weeks ago now, and I said 3 things have to happen immediately by the Chinese Communist Party. Number 1, the firewall must come down. It must come down. The people of China, the citizens of China, the decent, hardworking, old 100 names in China have to be able to communicate to the world. They have to get out there and tell them what their situation is. The world has to see this unfiltered by the Chinese Communist Party. And right now, there is no justification, no moral justification to have the firewall up. This is an emergency, and it's a humanitarian crisis. The firewall must come down, and any American company that's providing technology or capital or personnel to keep that firewall up is going to burn in hell, okay? Because now they are just prolonging the suffering of the Chinese people. That's number 1. Number 2, and I said this a couple weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party must take the best doctors from the world, from the CDC, the World Health Organization, from the Imperial College in London, from Hong Kong University, Dr. Gabriel Leung, the top virus hunters, the best, have to be allowed to get into Wuhan and Hubei province and see and report back exactly what the problem is and what their recommendations are. And number 3, the Chinese Communist Party has to be able to accept doctors and nurses from all over the world that would volunteer, military or otherwise, to go to Wuhan and go to Hubei. Because right now we see, I think there's 5,000 doctors and nurses that are infected. Okay? The new crisis you have is a collapse of the public health system in the central province and in Wuhan city. If that collapses, you can have tens of millions of people die. And that is something the CCP can avoid by taking nurses and doctors from all over the world and let them go to those central things. Until the government does that, to me, it's showing that 2 things. Number 1, they don't care about the Chinese people. They don't care how many people die. And number 2, they don't care about people throughout the world. What they care about is what they've always cared about, and that is their hold on power and their hold on wealth.
You were talking about the CCP mentality. It's interesting. I talked to one of the world's top biochemical weapon experts a couple of weeks ago, and he did not believe China is developing biological weapons. And the reasons are, 1, he said biological weapons are not effective on battlefields. Number 2, he said, unless you have a doomsday mentality, you wouldn't use biological weapons. And because China has such a long history, like you said, in a booming economy, the Chinese government wouldn't have a doomsday mentality. Do you think that CCP has a doomsday mentality?
I think they're totally godless. They're total atheists. They are totally materialistic. They only relate to money and power on this earth as it is. So they're the representatives of Satan on earth, right? They're completely godless. So therefore, they have no perception of an afterlife. They have no perception of heaven. They have no perception of kindness. This is a government that has suppressed the most decent, hardworking people on earth are the Chinese people. In the Chinese people, with the spiritual nature of the Chinese people, whether it's Falun Gong, whether it's the Tibetan Buddhists, whether it's the underground house Christians, whether it's the Catholic Church, right? They go out of their way to destroy that. Why do they go out of the way of all the stuff they destroy in China? Why are they most focused on destroying that? Because they can never have the Chinese people have their own spirituality. They can never have the Chinese people have their own ability to grow and develop and to find comfort in something that's spiritual, that something that's not the party. So by definition, they're a doomsday party. By definition, they believe in the worst aspects of human nature, and they play upon that. That's why it's all about money and power. And that's why in a situation like this, they never defer. Their default position is not let's do the right thing and let's help the Chinese people. Let's help our countrymen, right? What their natural inclination is to take Dr. Li and to throw Dr. Li in prison and to say, Dr. Li, you're a rumor monger. And Dr. Li is a hero not just to the Chinese people, he's a hero to the world because he said, no, this is what's happening. This has to get out. And then when he was totally exonerated, instead of leaving, he went back to the hospital to help his fellow citizens and to help the Chinese people, and he died in the process. He's a martyr to the doomsday mentality of the Chinese Communist Party.
Mm-hmm. I think when he talked about the doomsday mentality, he actually meant, if I cannot live, I would not let you live. It's kind of like a mutually assured destruction. If you threaten me, I cannot live, I would not let you live.
I can't talk about that because what I know is that if they did have a weapons program, right, in and of itself, because remember, they signed the conventions. Let's go back in time. In 1985, they signed the Biological Weapons Convention that said they were dropping all offensive biological weapons research, okay? As did the United States and everybody else. Why do we do that? If you take the three types of extreme warfare, nuclear, chemical, and biological, biological is by far the worst, and I disagree with the professional who said it's not effective. The problem with biological warfare, it's too effective. As bad as nuclear warfare is, and you saw that in Chernobyl, as bad as chemical warfare is, at some point in time it dissipates. Biological warfare, you're really changing and you're getting involved in God's natural plan, in the mechanics of the natural world. You're changing it. You're acting as God in the living world, okay? And that's why it's so hard to control. That's why it's so hard to find vaccines for. That's why of everything, the biological conventions and warfare have been the ones we've been most concerned about. When the French were approached by the Chinese Communist Party after the SARS crisis in around 2004, 2005, the agreements of the nations of the world, okay, and the French, in the French government, there was a huge debate on this, of building the path of the P4 lab in Wuhan, because you couldn't trust the Chinese Communist Party. They had to admit at that time that they had still been doing an active biological weapons program, but they weren't going to do it anymore. This was the deal that was signed to make sure the P4 lab that we're talking about could even come into existence. The Chinese Communist Party admitted they had lied to the world from 1985 to basically 2005 for 20 years. Why do they lie? Because the entire regime is a lie. Everything they say is a lie. It's built upon a lie. Lie is in their DNA like any kind of chemical compound. So when people say, can they lie? Yes, that's what they do. Remember, it's not a legitimate government. It's a gangster regime. It's a gangster regime like Hitler's was a gangster regime, like Tojo was a gangster regime, like Mussolini was a gangster regime. It's just a group of gangsters. They think like gangsters, they operate like gangsters, they rule like gangsters.
Let's talk about some of America's vulnerabilities. I think this coronavirus epidemic really exposes some of America's vulnerabilities as well. I had an interview with Rosemary Gibson. She was on your show too. She's the author of China RX. So she told me if this coronavirus epidemic lasts for another couple more months, then the Americans will see shortages of generic drugs, because 80% of the key ingredients of the generic drugs are made in China and India. But it wasn't like this before. In 1990s, 90% of the key ingredients are made in US, Japan, and Europe. So what happened?
What happened is called globalization. The same thing that happened in moving all the supply chains and the manufacturing center into kind of under the Chinese Communist Party, they could run like slaves and make extreme money, was that also, this is what happened throughout the world. It's the population density of China that took everybody from the rural areas and put them into these mega cities around the factories, not caring about their health and welfare and safety. Okay? It's this extreme concentration of population in China that makes it a breeding ground for these type of diseases. At the same time, the people on Wall Street in the city of London, these financiers with their companies said, oh, well, the slaves in China work for basically nothing, right? So let's move all the manufacture of not just the world's products, but all the drugs. API basically stands for the Active Pharmaceutical Agreement, API. Those are the basic compounds that make all the other drugs. So right now in the West, and India is the same way. India doesn't make it. It's all made in China. 80% to 90% of the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, they're in all these generic drugs are made in China. That means penicillin. That means vitamin C. That means basically aspirin. So all of it's made in China. If things don't start getting up and running in China and it's not infected, in the next 90 days, you could start to have massive shortages in the West. And this is why people are just waking up to this. And I've been saying from day one, the globalization project, which concentrated everything into China, because the poor Chinese workers work for nothing, and they have no environmental safety, they have no mental safety, that's why no mental hygiene, that's why the suicide rates are so high, they have no labor laws, they're treated as basically slaves. Okay, and so certainly the capitalists and the corporations want to partner with the CCP. They'd rather have slaves make things, because slaves make things less expensive. But for the rest of the world, this is what the economic contagion. You have both a health contagion and you have an economic contagion. The economic contagion is now just start to spread throughout the entire world, and it's going to have a massive impact. And it should have an impact. This is the wake-up call the world needed.
You know, the strange thing is this is also dangerous for the pharmaceutical companies, because what the Chinese government do is they push out all their companies, and they have very competitive prices, and they basically push out all the foreign competitors in the market. They become a monopoly, and then at that time they raise the price. So if those pharmaceutical companies know this is what's going to happen, I mean, they need to change the situation. What's that?
Well, they're not going to change the situation because they're making so much money. The American people have to change the situation. You know, I'm not one to sit there and say, oh, this is incumbent upon the people. People have to wake up. They have to start watching your show. They have to read the Epoch Times. They have to come to War Room Pandemic. It's incumbent upon the American people and the people of the world to wake up and understand that the corporate interest and the vested interest and the financiers have been selling the lies of the Chinese Communist Party. And now they can't cover up the lies anymore. This virus is making those lies non-sustainable. And you're about to see all this. But this is the people have to wake up. Once the people wake up and force the politicians. Remember, politicians are not leaders. Politicians are followers. It's the people that have to drive this. Then you're going to have a reckoning for the drug companies. You're going to have a reckoning, particularly in the generic drugs. We're about to have a very big reckoning in the United States. We don't make any of the masks. We don't make any of the consumables. We don't make any of the gowns. We don't make any of the gloves. None of it's made here in the West. There's literally 30 days of inventory. So this is going to get to be a big problem, and it should be a big problem.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about this with Rosemary. I mean, if all these gears are made in China, if the U.S. has an epidemic, what's going to happen? The Chinese government can weaponize their dominance.
It's okay, but gets to a deeper point. Rosemary's book came out 2 years ago. Okay, China RX, how China has now dominated the manufacturing, the pharmaceutical business, and how it's a national security problem. The book didn't sell many copies. She didn't get on TV anywhere. The book wasn't really reviewed. It was crickets. They specifically didn't want to talk about the book. Why is that? Because the drug makers take most of the ads out on TV. The drug makers are in business with the TV operations. That's how they make money. So they don't want Rosemary's book. They want to suppress Rosemary's book. Rosemary's book now, 2 years later, is becoming a hit. Why is that? Because we're in a crisis. In a crisis, people turn and say, hey, how did this go on? They said, oh, this woman named Rosemary Gibson, she explained this to everybody 2 years ago. And she said, I asked her when I had her on the show, how many years of research did you do? And I forget, it was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I said, why did it take you so long? She says, because nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it because the drug companies make too much money. Look, the world is driven by power and money. The Chinese Communist Party is about power and it's about money. Okay? That's how the world's driven. The same way in the West. But in the West, we have the ability to vote. You have the ability to have democracy. You have the ability to keep your politicians accountable. That's the power of the little guy. The little guy's power, he has a vote. And when he binds together with other little guys, they have extreme power. That's the Trump movement. It's the Bernie Sanders movement. It's AOC. You see this throughout the world starting to catch on fire. One day, when China's free, it's not because the rest of the world came in to free China. It's the Chinese people, old 100 names, finally got a belly full of it. And he threw off the bad guys. And then he's going to have a vote. And then every politician in China is going to be held accountable. So don't think we have some magic solution in the West, because Rosemary Gibson's book was suppressed. Why was it suppressed? The vested interest that makes so much money didn't want to talk about the reality that Rosemary Gibson had seen. Now, because of this crisis, it's coming out. And things will change, because in a democracy, it's the little guy that can demand change.
Has she got on CNBC yet?
I don't think she's no. I don't think she's gotten. She has not. She has not. Yeah, she has not gotten on there because of the pharmaceutical companies, etc. So we'll have to see. Look, remember, every day here, for your audience, particularly the people in China, don't think it's perfect here. It's not perfect. The little guy always has to fight. Right? That's why President Trump's so popular. He basically became the voice of the little guy on the right. It's why Bernie Sanders and AOC are so popular. They're for the little guy on the left. This is why you have these movements throughout the world. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Salvini in Italy, Modi in India, Abe in Japan, right? Le Pen in France, Nigel Farage on Brexit. Why? They're voices for the little people. But every day is a struggle. Every day is a fight. As one day when China's free and China has democracy, don't understand that's also not a panacea. It's going to be a million times better than living as a slave to the Chinese Communist Party, but still every day you're going to have to fight for your rights. You're going to have to fight for what's right. It's just it's the nature of democracy.
Let's talk about the big picture economy. Apple has closed all his 42 stores in China, and so did IKEA and Starbucks. I mean, how big of an impact do you think it is on the...
Well, it depends on how quickly they get control of it, but I don't think it's just the retail. Those are retail operations in China, which are bad enough. And you see that retail, and particularly high-end, where China has driven the luxury market for years and years and years, that's collapsed. More importantly, when you talk to Apple, I'm less concerned about are they closing Apple stores in Beijing than is Foxconn opening the factory in Shenzhen that makes this phone. That's the heart of it. And right now, Terry Guo, and I've talked to this many times on this show, he's totally tied to the CCP. That's why he ran for the president of Taiwan. He was going to be the CCP's representative. Terry Guo is not exactly somebody that cares a lot about his employees. They have a very high suicide rate. Terry Guo cannot open up the massive plants in southern China because of the virus, and they've tried. The key to everything right now is to see what's going on in those massive factories, the technology and electronics factories in the South. If they can't open up, and they can't open up quickly because the way the system's been put together, it's called just-in-time inventory. The Chinese factory can make it, and they can work the production lines overnight and work the poor Chinese workers to death to get the product out the door. That means the West does not have to keep a lot of inventory in its balance sheet. It basically will get shipped into an Apple store or to Walmart in several weeks, from a freighter, a tanker, a cargo ship on the Pacific to the ports in Los Angeles, the West Coast, to trains, into the inventory, etc. But very little inventory is kept. That's because the Chinese factories work around the clock. Now, what we're finding out, with no Chinese factories open after Golden Week, you have the inventory you have is what's on the cargo vessels, what's in the warehouses, or what's in the stores. And people are saying, hey, that may last us 30, 60, 90 days. We don't know, because we've never had this situation. Remember, in human history, this has never happened before. We've never had a concentration of a global supply chain from the globalists. And we've also never had one country that it all emanated from, and we've never had that country in lockdown. Remember, as we sit here today, the world has about 7.5, 7.6 billion people. 10% of the world's population is under quarantine in China. That's never happened in the history of the world. It's never been tried before. It's really biblical in scale to think about what this is Old Testament stuff, right? About this plague and how it's being dealt with. So we don't know. And the reason we don't know, nothing on this scale has ever been done before. But what I can tell you, it's not the luxury stores or the high-end stores in Shanghai or in Beijing and the great shopping areas that are the concern, although they're all closed. What is the concern is those factories. Can they get up and going in putting forward? But I will say one thing for your audience, and this is what the CCP has brought on the Chinese people. It will never go back to the way it was. You're going to see these companies in the West are going to say, hey, you know, we didn't see this thing coming. We were lied to when it happened. We need to have stability. And I think you're going to start to see the big manufacturing facilities ultimately start to go to other places around Asia and ultimately back to the United States. And so I think it's going to have a massive impact on the Chinese economy.
So that's the question. If this short-term thing can become long-term, because if you look back, for the SARS epidemic in 2003, 2004, you know, the economy was affected only for 1.5 quarters, and then things...
Two things are different. China was very small. It was only about a $1.5 trillion economy at that time. Okay. Also, China was not the centerpiece of the global logistics chain. It was trying to. The Chinese economy today is basically $17 trillion, right next to the American economy. But more importantly, the entire global logistics chains comes from those factories, particularly, remember, Wuhan is a telecommunication and air travel in a logistics center throughout China. Then you have the factories in the South. The factories in the South are the global supply chain. It's not part of it. It's the central part of it. The world's economy has radically changed on the backs of the Chinese people in the last 15 or 20 years. That's where you're talking something very differently. But just the way the capitalists think, you need stability. The Chinese will always say, we have stability. We have a firewall. We have a docile population. I have facial record, technology. I have social credit. They got to behave like good boys and girls, or will affect their lifestyle. They're essentially slave labor force, and we have total control because we're the Chinese Communist Party. So it's complete stability to put your plant here, to put your capital here, that we will take care of everything else. And as long as the capitalists look the other way on the freedom, right, of the Chinese people, the system worked. But then when it started to crack, trust me, the capitalists will be the first guys to bolt because they say, hey, we tell the world that they're okay, but we know they lied to us, right? Remember, they lied about SARS, but it wasn't important enough at the time to have catastrophic consequences. And as soon as the West got involved, the SARS thing, Dr. Gabriel Leung in Hong Kong University, the great Hong Kong Chinese doctor, is really one of the people that came up with the SARS solution. So it's just totally different today, but it's going to have a massive long-term impact, there's no doubt.
Anything else you want to add?
I just think this is a crisis of historic proportion. They're going to look back this in 100 years from now about how everybody behaved. And that's why we're working 24 hours a day here at the War Room on pandemic to get all the information out. I would just tell all your readers, and the Epoch Times reporting has been amazing. Your show has been amazing. But right now, they're going to look back 100 years from now on what we're actually doing and saying right now. It is time that we got to force the world. We have to force the financial world. We have to force the business world. We have to force the media world. We have to force the political world. They must be forced to look at the CCP for exactly what it is. For too many years, they've been able to look away about organ harvesting. They've been able to look away what happened to the Tibetan Buddhists and the Dalai Lama. They've been able to look away what happened in East Turkestan to the Uyghurs. They've been able to look away with the suppression of the underground Christian church. They've been able to look away to what's happened to the Falun Gong. They've been able to look away. The Vatican can make a deal and look the other way about what's happening, the sellout of the underground Catholic Church. The whole world, the power in the world has been able to look away from what the Chinese Communist Party has wrought. Okay? They can't look away any longer. And you know why? The virus, the demon virus is coming from them. Okay? This virus is something that's coming everywhere in the world. And it doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. It doesn't matter how much money you have, what political office, what your title is. It doesn't matter. This virus is coming for you. And now we know that the Chinese Communist Party, if it was not created by them, and let's assume it was not, let's assume it's natural, they still lied about it and suppressed the knowledge of this and didn't take action enough. And when they took action, they were too incompetent to do it correctly. And they continue to suppress information and not let the world come in and actually get their hands on this. And they have foisted this crisis on all humanity. And now people understand what the Chinese people, the noble and decent people in China, have been suppressed and what they've gone through for decades and decades and decades. Now it's come to the rest of the world. So it is now time. This virus will take down the Chinese Communist Party. Mark my words.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Bannon.
Thanks for having me on, Simone. Appreciate it.